morning, I'm Claire Murphy. Welcome to the Solo Bureau. So every now and then we drop what we like to call, and I say we, like it's not just me doing this by myself, we like to drop a little thing called a Saturday special, and that is what's happening today. You might have heard earlier in the week I spoke to my good friend Caroline Winter. She is a widow and she shares her story quite regularly to help others who might be finding themselves in a similar situation, who might be dealing with grief, who might not know at that moment that there is a future, that you can find love again. The things that she tells us in this interview about her new partner and the things that he does to make sure that her late partner is not forgotten, because he understands how important he is for his wife to still remember the man who came before him. I swear to you, I teared up. It was beautiful. But earlier in the week, we don't have a lot of time. We're commuting to work. We're getting kids off to school. We're walking dogs. We got a lot to get done. So the half-hour conversation that Caroline and I had, I thought maybe we'd save the full thing for today when we had a little bit of leisure time to maybe take it all in. So without further ado, I would like you to sit down and just listen to my beautiful friend Caroline tell her story about Richard. Caroline, welcome to the Solo Bureau.
Oh, it's so good to be with you. Thanks, Claire.
I've just been telling everybody how you and I have known each other for a very long time. But despite that, because we've been colleagues, professional acquaintances and sort of more respectful friends as we've grown older, but I never met Richard. Can you tell me a little bit about him?
Oh, you didn't, and I'm sad that you didn't. You would have loved him, and I say that because it was hard not to love him. He was we always described him as cheeky, which always seemed funny for someone he was older than me by 17 years, but so young at heart. So he was cheeky and funny, and he was smart, and he was a radio guy, so he was in the radio industry as well, and so we sort of spoke the same language on many levels, and yeah, he was my best friend.
I have mentioned how, I'm going to use the word incestuous, radio businesses can be.
So true.
That we all know each other with one degree of separation. But do you remember the day you met Richard?
I do. I had moved to Albury-Wodonga to take up a new position in a commercial radio newsroom over there, and I didn't know anyone in town. And I walked into the hub, as it was known, and he was one of the managers. Spoiler alert. He was one of the managers, not my direct manager, fortunately, but I remember meeting him and he had these incredibly sweet dimples. And I thought, oh, isn't that gorgeous on, an older man? He's got these funny little dimples and he just had a sparkle in his eye. And I think from that moment, there was not necessarily a connection, but I could just tell that there was something. There was definitely something, and from that grew a friendship between the two of us, as well as being sort of at a distance work colleagues.
You mentioned there that he's 17 years or was 17 years older than you. Did it ever kind of cross your mind through the course of your relationship how that would play out for you? And I'm guessing you would have thought about that in more of a future sense, that as you age, that he's got, 17 years ahead of you?
It is such a good question, and yes, it did, but not in the way that now, when I look back, that perhaps it should have. I just thought, we're going to be at different stages of our lives for, a fair amount of our lives. I was in my 30s when we met, and he was in his late 40s, and so we were just at different stages. But it was really interesting. At no point did I sort of think, oh, well, one day you won't be here and I will still be here. And if that's going to be, it's going to be, years and years in the future. And I do remember him one day, we were going for lunch, and out of the blue, we were just walking into the restaurant and he said, when I die, not if I die, but when I die, I want you to, meet someone else and be happy. And I was so taken aback because I guess I was in my 30s and you don't think about people dying, and certainly not your husband dying, but he was obviously cognizant of the fact that he was older than me, and that at some point that was likely going to happen before I went.
You said you were at different stages throughout your relationship. At what stage would you say you were at in 2013?
I was only reflecting on this when I was reading my diary, which I'd kept for the first 12 months. So I was reading back on that. And I was 37 and he was 53. And we were just the two of us. We didn't have any children, but we'd started talking again. We'd sort of, scored a line through that, but we'd started talking again only recently about perhaps thinking about having a baby. And so when I reflected on that, I think where I thought I was in my head compared to where we actively were, because it was such a tumultuous few years after he died. But yeah, we were actually at a point where I think we were going to sort of start a family, which was a really interesting thing for me. But I guess, in my 30s, I knew it would be a sort of probably a last ditch bid if we were going to do it. And him in his early 50s, didn't want to be an old dad, so to speak. So yeah, that's where we were at.
So now we get to the part that I'm presuming you have talked about. Well, I know you've talked about this many, many, many times in so many different formats, because you have been helping people who are also going through this time in their lives. But right before Richard passed, he did tell you that he'd been feeling a bit off, and he did actually go and see a doctor, right?
Yeah, 100%. So probably a couple of months, he'd just not been feeling great. And I said, should go and see someone. He was notoriously bad at going to the doctor, and I'm
As
sure
men
he
are.
wouldn't mind me saying that.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So he didn't have a regular doctor, and he said, "Look, I'm just feeling a bit off. I'm sure it's nothing." And I said, "Look, why don't you just go down to the local medical centre just to see?" And he did. He went and saw just a random doctor who took one look at him, listened to his story, and he sort of said he'd been a bit stressed at work, and there'd been some things going on outside of work, and he put it down to stress. And so he gave him some Valium, prescribed him some Valium, and said, "Look, just go home and take it easy." And I was so, proud that he'd gone to see this doctor finally, but what he was experiencing was what was going to end up being a fatal heart attack. And the doctor sort of passed it off as indigestion and stress, and there was nothing more to it. And it angered me for so long after that a man of 53 might walk into your clinic, and you might not suggest an ECG, or you might not suggest some tests that would be appropriate for a man of that age, even though he was super healthy, even though he didn't smoke and he really didn't drink. So yeah, he did seek help, but unfortunately it was not the help he needed.
I think we've learnt this more in recent years, especially after the passing of Shane Warne, that men in their early 50s are at a really susceptible time for cardiac arrest. And I guess this is something that, if you are a man listening to this right now and you happen to be in that age bracket, or if you are married to one or know of one, that if they're feeling a bit off and they're in their early 50s, we should probably be asking GPs to maybe delve a little deeper into potential heart problems. But
Yeah.
that day that he went off to drive in a rally car, I'm presuming when you sent him off, your biggest fear was that that car would crash and he would somehow hurt himself. But that
Yes.
but that didn't end up being the case. Can you talk us through what your day looked like the day he went to sort of live out his dream and drive a rally car?
He was so excited. I cannot even tell you, he'd wanted to do this for so long, and he was the co-driver with a friend of ours who was driving, and they were off to be in this rally. He'd gone the night before. It was a Friday night that he'd gone up, and I had a work function on that Friday night, and said I'd come up and meet him on the Saturday after they'd done their first few laps. And so I spoke with him about 10:30 the next morning, and he said, "Yep, we're just about to shoot off." And I imagined him, he'd bought this bright red driving suit, and he just looked like a red Teletubby. It's no other way to describe it. And I imagined him in his suit, ready to go, his helmet under his arm, and he was super excited. And our call didn't last very long, but I said, "Look, I'll see you in a few hours." I was about to get in the car and drive up, and the last thing we did say to each other was "I love you," which I'll be forever grateful for. And I stopped off, got some coffee and some breakfast on my way. It was a couple of hours north of Adelaide, and drove up to Robertstown. And as I pulled in, it was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I pulled into the oval there where the race was being held. And there were some police just at the gate, which I thought was pretty natural because it was a race and they had all sorts of emergency services. And one of the police officers sort of waved at me and kind of waved me over. And in my head, I thought, gosh, that's such a Richard thing to do. He would have said, oh, look out for my wife in her little Ford Festiva. She'll be coming up, and just direct her to where I am. And so I pulled over and I wound down the window, and I said to the officer, I said, "Oh, yes, hi." And said, "Are you Caroline Winter?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And said, "Oh, could you just step out of the car? I just want to have a chat to you." And I remember I tell this story all the time, but it's the bit that always gets me, catches me in the throat, because I remember turning to the passenger's seat and putting my sunglasses on the seat, and at that moment, just knowing that something huge was about to change, and it's like a sixth sense almost. And I stepped out of the car, and the officer said to me, "Look, there's been an accident or an incident." And I said, "Oh, okay." And he said, "Yeah, look, your husband, something's happened." And I said, "Okay." They said, "He's had a heart attack." And to your point, I thought, well, gosh, well, I would have thought it was going to be a crash, if anything, but that was a relief. And so I immediately said, "Oh, okay, okay. So where is he?" And he and the officer next to him, they both just looked at me and they just didn't have words. And I was just at that moment, um, I knew, and then one of them said, I'm sorry, but there wasn't anything we could do." And your world just spins. That strange sort of, everything slows down, the color kind of bleeds out of the scene that you're a part of, and from that moment on, shock sets in, and I realized that, yeah, he had died.
I can't imagine how you feel in that moment. But what I do understand, having experienced it a few times now, is regardless of how a loved one passes away, whether it is sudden or whether it is protracted, is that there is so much happens in the aftermath of death. There are plans, there are people, there's a funeral. It's almost ridiculously overwhelming for people who should be maybe sitting with it for a minute. It's a lot of activity. But then everything just kind of stops. Like, all of that comes to an end. People go back to their lives. The funeral planning is done. You might have to deal with, belongings and estates and money and things like that. But essentially things quieten down quite quickly after that. Can you tell me about that time for you, when things stopped, when you did finally have a moment to have a look at what your life looked like now after Richard's death?
Someone told me at some point in that whole process that it's about the 6-week mark. And I was like, well, that's very prescriptive. And, a line in the sand that at 6 weeks, suddenly the noise around you disappears. But they were right. And I remember thinking at that sort of 6-week mark, when my family had gone back to Perth, and the flowers had stopped coming and the lasagnas were all eaten, I realized that it was just me in this big house of ours, that once there was, you know, 2 lots of rubbish that would go in the bin that you would take out once a week, that there would be, 2 cups of coffee in the morning, that there would be 2 of everything, and suddenly it was just 1. And it was a really jarring moment. By that stage, the shock, the immediate shock has worn off, and that realization that this is now the rest of your life, and it wasn't something that you asked for, and it certainly wasn't something you would ever have wished for, but you just had to kind of figure it out. There were lots of, crying in the shower and the car, which are fantastic places to lose it, and lots of, quiet self-reflecting moments. But I realized at some point I had to get up and just kind of keep going, whatever that looked like. And one of the things that really helped me, because you feel so out of control in every aspect of your life, is that if I could just do some small things that gave me back some control, then I thought I could function. And one of those randomly was making the bed every morning. So it didn't matter if I got back into it in the middle of the day, but getting up and going through that process of making the bed, changing my clothes, even if I was just putting a tracksuit on, but just getting out of my pajamas, for me, let me grab back a little bit of control. And so I think that was the beginning of finding small things that I could kind of claw back and not feel like they'd be taken from me. I think that was probably my biggest fear, that this person had been taken from me. And so, anything could be taken from me. So it was a real readjustment after that. Yeah.
Do you know what a lot of people say when one of their close people go, or when their friend loses someone close, is that they don't know how to help them in the moment or how to be helpful in the moment to someone who's grieving. Do you remember anything that people did for you during that time that stands out to you as something that really helped support you through that grief?
It's a really interesting one, because when you go through something like that you've not been through before, you don't know how to help yourself. And so often you're not sure how other people can help you, especially when they say, is there anything I can do? Or just let me know if there's something I can do. But what I did find really helpful, and some of my friends, bless them, are very practical. I'm useless when it comes to this stuff, but they were very practical. Was, just I had a friend who came and stayed with me, just so that there was another person in the house for as long as I needed. There was another friend who, bless her, flew in from interstate just to make a fridge full of food so that I didn't have to think about feeding myself, or even worse, cooking for one, not two. There was my very closest group of friends when I finally decided to sell the house, who all came over and helped me pack, so I didn't have to do it alone. So I think that actually those practical things that you've got so much going on, as you point out, so much going on to try and settle, estates and finances and figure out life going forward, that a lot of those practical things fall through the cracks. So I found that super helpful. And of course, just being there, sitting in silence with a friend sometimes is everything. You don't even need to say anything. So they were some of the things that really helped me.
So life has to go on after this, Caroline. Like,
It
you
does.
have to keep moving forward. Otherwise,
Yep.
the worst potential outcome can happen. So when your future plans get that abruptly derailed, how do you keep yourself from just stopping?
I went back to work after about 6 weeks, so sort of that quiet period. I thought, no, it's time for me to just step back in. So I went back to work a couple of days a week. My workplace was exceptionally, they were just brilliant. Sort of allowed me to come back as much as I needed. If I couldn't come in, that was okay. So I was very fortunate in that way. Um, and that sort of helped me start to reintegrate, if that's a word, into the world again. Um, Occasionally, I would go out with a friend, "Why don't you come for dinner?" or "Why don't you come to a bar?" And I remember doing that for the first couple of times, and how alien it felt to be around people laughing and kind of going on like the world hadn't stopped, and my world had completely stopped. But it was just slowly dipping my toe in the water, just to get back into some of the things that you would, I guess, call, everyday life. I used to go to the gym with Richard, and I had to quit that gym because I just, there's things where you want to be, remember your person, and they are everywhere. They're in every nook and cranny of your life. But I thought, maybe I'll join a new gym, and I'll treat myself to, a spa, and I'll do those things that might just make me feel human again. One of the things that I found hardest was, when you have your person, and intimate with that person in terms of touching and kissing, and just being around them, holding hands, you really miss that. And I remember going for a massage a few months after Richard had died, and I just remember bursting into tears, having someone else's hands on me so intimately. So it's just a bit of a, sort of trying things and allowing yourself to go there when you think you can, but also understanding that everybody's different, and what might be, if it was right for me to go back to work even a couple of days a week inside 6 weeks, that might not be right for the next person. But yeah, that slow reintegration to society is pretty crazy. And one of the things that I was surprised about, I eventually found that our house it began as like my sanctuary, and it's just where I wanted to get back to. And as the months passed, I actually didn't want to be there, and that was because his absence was so great. that I felt, yeah, I started to feel worse, and so that's when I decided to sell the house. So there's also, the advice of not making any really big life decisions inside a certain time period, but I think you've got to do what's right for you, and fortunately, that was the right decision for me at the time.
When do you start to reimagine yourself as a singular rather than a couple? Because when you break up with someone, you have a period where you readjust back out into the world. You might see them around a few times. You might call them a few names. And then you pick yourself up, brush yourself off, whack on a bit of lippy, get yourself back out there. This is a very different process because you're not just single, you're a widow. And that is a whole new label that I imagine does not sit comfortably, at least in the first part of this conversation. So how do you as a widow step back out into the world and meet people again?
It's so weird, isn't it? Because you're right, a breakup is, even if it's not you doing the breaking up, but it's sort of a thing that happens to two people. But when one person just disappears and there's been no logical reason why that love should have stopped, it's a really strange thing to suddenly go, okay, well, I still love Richard. He's still there, but I'm also feeling like I want to get out there and meet other people, or at least just be exposed to other people. Um, and there's that really fine line and tricky debate that you have in your head of, oh, if I show interest in someone else, even if that's what I absolutely want, am I betraying Richard? Is he watching me over my shoulder? Am I doing the right thing? So there's a lot of conflicting feelings when that happens. I do remember when I sort of first had a really big belly laugh for the first time, and I realized that when that happened, it was a very genuine laugh, and I thought, "Okay, you're gonna be alright because you've not forgotten how to really laugh." Um, and the same goes when I had a little spark inside my stomach, a little bit of, butterfly action, and thought, "Okay, it's still there." Now I've just gotta work out how I take Richard with me, because he still exists, and I'm not sure how you fit someone else in when he's still inside me. So that was probably the tricky bit. Um, but there was a little spring of excitement when I realized that I was still here. Richard had gone, but I was still here, and there was a life to be lived, and I was gonna live it.
So that you have. And if anyone follows you on Instagram, they would know that you've been doing quite a bit over the last 13 years, however long it's been.
Yeah.
Your career has gone wonderfully. You've been, working for the ABC, and you've been making podcasts and traveling not just around Australia to make them, but around the world, helping others to learn media. And then you're in your 50th year this year, as you told me off air before this, and you've been gallivanting with the gals around the world on various trips. But in amongst all of that, you met someone else and got remarried. And I'm really interested to know how you navigate Richard within that new relationship, because that grief is going to stay with you forever in various ways and forms. And how do you then have a new partner that also has to play a role in that grief and understand that that other person is always kind of going to be there?
Oh, Claire, you've put it beautifully, and it's tricky, and it requires a whole lot of, sort of internal fortitude to try and figure it out, not fall to pieces. Although in the first couple of years, when I met my now husband, Drew, the poor man, I mean, thank goodness he knows how to deal with a grieving widow. Not that he'd had practice, but I was very much in the depths of grief still, and still am, but just don't fall apart the way I used to. Meeting Drew and having him come into my life was something totally unexpected. Was not looking for it in the slightest. In fact, and we do joke about it, but it was a true story. I was trying to set him up with my best friend, and she was saying to me, "Yeah, no, he's really interested in you." And he'd say to me, "Yeah, I really like her, but she's not my type." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm literally being Cupid and I'm stuck in the middle." So I didn't see it coming. And maybe that was a nice thing too. What I was lucky for, though, is that Drew is an exceptionally generous understanding man who also isn't jealous, because I have heard that that can happen, that I have this love in my heart that I was spending my life with this man and he died, and here comes this other person, and suddenly there's a competition there. So he's been extremely understanding and accepting of, not just my grief, but me trying to figure out what new love looks like. And it took me a few years to figure out how to do that. It's a little bit, I guess, like having children. When you say you have one child and you're about to have your second or your third, how am I going to find room in my heart to love this one as much as the other one?
And for
And
people who don't have kids, your pets can also be like that. When your pet passes away and you're like, how could I
Abs
ever think of possibly replacing that pet in my life? And then a new dog comes along and you're like, oh, my heart just expanded tenfold.
100%, 100%. And that's what I realized. I realized that there was room for two loves. And I kept getting really, being a journalist, I obviously work with words, and I get quite muddled with words. Like, how could I say that Richard was my soulmate? If Drew's my soulmate, can they both be my soulmate? Can they both be the loves of my life? And so I got a bit tangled in the words, and then I let that go and just said, you know what? You have got enough room to love both of these people and also have them sit side by side. And so I, rather than say moving forwards, I say moving sideways, because I feel like my train was derailed and ended up just moving in a different direction, but in a parallel. So it means that in my head and in my heart, I bring Richard with me every step of the way. And Drew has been incredible at not just supporting me in that, but really respecting that. And probably my favourite moments are when, and he does still do this, he'll go out to the garage and look for a tool that he doesn't. He goes, "Oh, thanks, Richard," and I'll just hear him talking to Richard, um, and I just think that means that Richard's part of my life very much. And um, Drew was lucky enough to meet Richard's parents, and Richard's parents were lucky enough to meet Drew. And so I feel very, very and blessed and grateful at words that are overused, but I really do feel like that because it is hard enough being widowed and trying to find your life and what it looks like without your person, without having an added complication that comes with that. So, yeah, I feel very lucky indeed.
Oh, that almost made me actually cry then, him thanking Richard when he finds something in the shed. That is
It
just
really does.
precious. Oh,
It's so beautiful.
gosh, that's
and
gorgeous.
and we, on Richard's birthday and on Richard's the anniversary of when he died, we always toast him, and we, say a few words, and it's always, he's never far. He's never far. And so yeah, I feel lucky. They don't just both exist in my heart, but they both exist in my life.
And also good on you for doing what you were told, Caroline, because Richard did tell you if anything happened to him, you should go on and meet somebody else.
Wow, weren't they some prescient words that I didn't see coming?
Well, just to end on today, and I know everyone's experience is going to be different when it comes to losing a partner, but if you had a few words of advice, what do you tell people who are freshly wearing that widow tag?
Yeah. Look, it's a tough word to start with, and when you have to tick that first form, that box on, some form that you're filling out, and there's a box for widow.
Is there a box
it
for widow?
There is a box for widow.
Ouch.
Yep.
Okay.
I know. It's really gross. Anyway, I was saying to you before we started chatting, Veuve Clicquot, was a widow of her husband, who
Widow
was
Clicquot, yes.
indeed the champagne maker. So that always makes me feel better about the word. If you're worried about it, think champagne. But probably my biggest advice, and as you say, everyone's different, so take this with a grain of salt, but um, take it day by day. Take, every moment that you can manage to do something. If it works for you, that's great. If it doesn't, that's okay. And you'll find that some days something might be easier than the next day, and that's all right too. I think the other thing is I said a lot of no instead of saying yes. I'm a very yes person. And I just needed to say no a lot more to protect my heart, to protect my emotions, my physical state, my mental state, and only say yes when you know that it's good for you, certainly in those early days. So they were a couple of things I kind of wished I knew at the time. But step by step, day by day, that's the best I can offer.
Well, that is sage advice, my friend, and thank you for telling this story. I know it's one you share often because you do it to support others who are going through this, and I think that takes a lot of fortitude to take a moment that is potentially one of the worst of your entire life and turn it into a light for others. So thank you for sharing it with us too, Caroline. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm so excited to be on the Solo Bureau. So well done to you, my friend. I wish you everything and more for the future.
Thank you. Look at us gals just making hay while the sun shines. If you want to check out some of Caroline's excellent work, there's a couple of podcasts she's done which are really stand out. One is called Sick as a Dog, and it is about the vet industry. So I'm talking about animal vets and the toll that their job takes on their mental health. She does talk about a young vet who sadly took her own life because of the pressure that she was under in her practice. And she also makes one called The Widow Diaries, where she talks about her experience and speaks to others about it too. So go and check them out. Caroline Winter is an absolute delight of a human being. Thanks for spending your Saturday with me. Hopefully you got a better understanding on dealing with the grief of losing a partner, but also just what I really took away from it is when someone is in the midst of grief, sometimes you just got to get in their house and do shit for them because they don't even know what they want you to do. They don't know what help they need. They're not going to be in a headspace to ask. We got to just do. Take them in the palm of your hand and be their village, I guess is the answer. Have a fabulous rest of your weekend. I will see you here on Monday with some more news here on the Solo Bureau. Have a good one.